Back in 2014, my buddy Ethan and I had been hiking together for years, exploring every corner of the Pacific Northwest and pushing ourselves through deserts down south, climbing mountains side by side. Our next adventure was the Frank Church River of no return wilderness. Everyone just called it the Frank. We planned to go in, camp out for a few days, and see what kind of mysteries or adventures that wild stretch of land had waiting for us. We packed our gear, hitched up the car, and headed north from California into Idaho, starting what we thought would be a pretty straightforward, long but manageable trip. The drive took us 2 days, first up -5 going north, then shifting east into Idaho's interior. Before long, we caught sight of the Frank sprawling out in front of us, a massive 2 million acres of rugged wilderness that made anything we'd tackled before look tiny in comparison. We pulled into a gravel parking lot near the middle fork of the Salmon River, past a faded sign warning us about bears and wildfires, then grabbed our packs from the trunk. They felt heavy as hell, but that was mostly because they were stuffed with all our food, our tent, sleeping bags, water filters, and pretty much everything else we'd need for a few days out there. Our lives in those packs, honestly. On that first day, we stuck to the trail, moving at a steady pace through tall pine and cedar trees. The forest was quiet, not silent, exactly, but gentle, almost calming, and as we made our way around 8 miles, we ended up camping near a creek when evening fell. The next day was pretty much more of the same, deeper into the woods, winding through valleys and climbing ridges, with the underbrush thickening so much it was swallowing parts of the trail. We didn't talk much, just focused on walking, snacking on trail mix, and glancing at our maps now and then just to confirm we were headed right. When sunset came, we set up our tent on a flat patch of ground, boiled water for some instant noodles, and then fell asleep like we'd been run over. Those 18 miles through the Frank felt like hours, but we felt dialed in, eager for what was next. But by the third day, a restless feeling was growing in us, hard to describe, but it was there. The trails, they were fine for tourists, but we'd come for something real. So when Ethan suggested we take a shortcut across the rough terrain, leaving the trail behind to see what most people never got to, I didn't argue. We veered off into the woods, and that's when everything changed almost immediately. The forest grew denser, with massive tree trunks wider than my shoulders and roots sprawling out like veins beneath the dirt. Moss covered everything, dulling the sunlight that filtered through the canopy, and the ground beneath our feet felt like sponges. Thick, soft, almost impossible to walk quickly. We slowed down, carefully avoiding rabbit holes and scrambling over fallen logs. It was rough going, but honestly, it felt like we'd traveled back in time, like the woods were untouched, ancient. Suddenly, Ethan froze and tilted his head like he'd heard something. A second later, I caught it to a steady, low hum, deep and out of place in the quiet forest. It wasn't wind or water or animals, it was mechanical, almost electronic, like something artificial. Neither of us said anything, just looked at each other, driven by mutual curiosity, and started walking toward that noise. It grew louder as we advanced, pushing through a tangle of saplings to finally stop dead in our tracks. There, sunk into a low rise, was an old bunker. Its steel door hung slightly ajar, crooked in its frame. We could see strange symbols scratched into the concrete, circles, zigzags, lines twisting into chaos. The hum was coming from inside, and once we got close enough, we could hear a distorted metallic sound, mixed with what sounded like screaming vocals. The door hung almost open, just a tiny crack, and the noise spilled out. Ethan and I froze when we saw it. Just a few feet from the bunker, we stared at that heavy metal music blaring from inside, aggressive, violent, like death metal or hardcore punk. But that's not what made us tense. It was the fact that anyone would be out here, in the middle of nowhere, playing something that loud, that intense. Ethan shot me a look, eyes wide, and I knew what he was thinking. Sure, maybe it was a bunch of metal heads throwing a party in an abandoned bunker, but what if it wasn't? What if they had a reason to be so hidden away? the kind of reason that made us want to turn around and walk away fast. I looked back toward the trail we'd come from, tilting my head as if to say, "Let's get out of here." Ethan nodded and we started to back off, determined to put miles between us before dark. But we barely made it a few hundred yards before we found out we weren't alone. We were walking and joking about who would build a bunker way out here when suddenly, from the trees, two men appeared, blocking our path. They were dressed in full camouflage, faces obscured behind black ski masks, each clutching a rifle that looked like an AK, barrels pointed downward, grips tight. My blood ran cold as Ethan and I stopped short, our hearts pounding. I could hear his breathing beside me, and I knew he was sizing them up just like I was. The men didn't say a word. For a second, their eyes behind the slits in those masks seemed to study us. Then, out of nowhere, one of them raised his rifle and ordered, "On your knees," voice flat and cold, with no room for arguments. Ethan's hand started moving toward his pack, probably to grab his pistol, but we were totally outgunned. We had nothing but our survival gear. Then Ethan did something I'll never forget. He unclipped his pack, let it drop, and took off running into the woods. That snap of his pack hitting the ground was enough to snap me out of the paralyzing fear. I tore off my straps too, ditching the weight, and bolted after him, adrenaline fueling every step as we sprinted through the rough terrain. Behind us, a crack echoed a gunshot, loud and sharp, ringing in my ears. Tree bark exploded on my left, splinters flying into my face. I ducked, weaving between the trunks, running alongside Ethan, who was dodging obstacles just ahead. A voice barked from behind, commanding, "Cease fire. We need them alive." I thought they'd hold back after that, but a few seconds later, the gunfire picked up again, lower shots, kicking up dirt around my feet. They weren't trying to kill us, just slow us down, cripple us enough that they could catch us or drag us back. My lungs burned, but I kept pushing, matching Ethan's stride for stride, our pace relentless. At one point, the shooting stopped, but we kept sprinting. I didn't know how far we'd gone, probably a mile or two, but suddenly we stopped, exhausted. My legs trembled, my chest heaved, and Ethan leaned against a tree to recover. We checked behind us. The forest was eerily still. No more shots, just the wind gently rustling the leaves. We'd lost those men and our packs too. All our supplies, food, gear, maps gone. We were in a bad way, probably the worst you could imagine. Still, there was no choice but to keep moving. The first night, unprepared as we were without tents or sleeping bags, was brutal. The cold crept into our bones fast as the temperature dropped sharply. My stomach was roaring, emptiness echoing in the silence. We huddled against a fallen log, pulling our jackets tight, eyes glued to the darkness, waiting for those men to come back or find us. But they didn't. Ethan was just as restless as I was, hardly sleeping, sitting there in the dark, waiting. When dawn finally broke, I was starving, and we found some sour berries from a low shrub, barely ripe. We ate a handful and grimaced, fingers stained red with the juice, both knowing to avoid any poisonous ones. Years of hiking helped. Still, it didn't silence the gnawing hunger. We relied on the sun for a rough direction and headed south, toward the car. I had a dull headache behind my eyes, and every step made my stomach twist worse, restless, painful. We kept moving all day, stopping only briefly to sip water from streams with our hands. Night approached again, and we found a shallow hollow under a rocky overhang. We couldn't light a fire, too risky, and not enough food to cook anyway. I drifted in and out, waking every time a leaf shifted or the wind stirred, every sound making my heart jump. The third day was by far the worst. My legs felt dead, lead weight dragging me down, and we stumbled on more berries and roots Ethan remembered, but the hunger was still relentless. My vision blurred around the edges, exhaustion setting in deep. I mostly just followed Ethan's battered frame ahead, shoulders slumped, pace slowing. We didn't talk, didn't even think about the men or the bunker anymore. We just kept walking. When we finally hit the dirt road, I swear I could have cried. It was a narrow, rutted trail cutting through the trees, barely wide enough for a truck. But it was a road. We staggered along it until a ranger station appeared, a simple wooden building with a pickup parked outside. We were filthy, scraped up, eyes sunken in. The ranger, a guy with a graying beard, looked at us and just said, "I'll get you some coffee." We sat there, trembling, and told him everything about the bunker, the weird symbols, the guys with rifles, and how they chased us. He called the police, who showed up an hour later, took down our statements, then sent rangers to check out the site. When those rangers came back, they found nothing. No sign of the bunker, no people, no gear, just the concrete shell with scratch marks and symbols. Our packs, the bloodstains, vanished as well. The police weren't surprised, and one officer even mentioned that the Frank had a long history of militia activity, groups that trained, gathered, partied out in the wilderness, beyond the eyes of authorities. He said we'd probably crossed paths with a dangerous, violent group and just happened to get out alive. They warned us not to go back through that area. No arrests, no leads, just a shrug, a warning, and a drive home. Ethan stared out the passenger window in silence, and I clung to the wheel, mind replaying everything in a loop. The forest had once felt like a sanctuary, a place of peace, but on the drive back, it felt hostile, threatening. We didn't talk about the woods or the bunker after that, not openly, not for a long time. I keep wondering who those men were, if they ever came back, rifles in hand, watching for the next fools like us to wander too close. I'll never forget how small I felt standing there, staring up at the sky, waiting for something that never appeared. I don't know if it's dangerous or just there, but I feel it's not normal, and I probably never will. Then back in the late 80s, I was part of a rescue team in Olympic National Forest. It was a quiet summer, just me, a few others, looking for a hiker named Terry who'd gone out solo and hadn't come back. His wife waited till Monday to report him missing, thinking he'd just stayed out longer than usual. When Tuesday rolled around, she called us, describing his gear, his last known location near a trailhead by the Quinnell River, with plans to reach a ridge about 8 miles north. To us it sounded routine. Terry knew the forest well. I'd bet my last dollar we'd find him before sunset. But the mission turned strange fast. About 30 or 40 of us gathered at dawn, loading up with radios, first aid kits, maps, ropes, flashlights. Our team took the western edge of the search zone, near the river, while others split east. The plan was simple: carefully scan the woods north, reach the ridge, find Terry, and bring him out. The hours dragged, slow and tense, with us calling his name every so often, scouring for any sign. Then, around noon, I heard a voice come over my radio, one of my teammates, saying she'd found something. I adjusted my course and hurried over to join them. They were looking up in a tree about 30 feet off the ground, a torn, open backpack hanging there, straps flapping, contents spilled on the branches below. It was Terry's, just like his wife had described. The bag was a green military-style kit with a red patch stitched on the side. Jim, one of my teammates, volunteered to climb up with a rope. The tree was tall and spindly, the branches fragile, but the bag was lodged high, as if thrown with brutal force. When Jim brought the bag down, we saw the damage, long gashes from what looked like something sharp, but no bites or scratches. Inside, Terry's water bottle was cracked, his half-eaten sandwich crushed and sticky, yet no blood. Not yet. We figured that would come later. A couple hours later, my teammate radioed in, saying she found one of Terry's boots in a small clearing. I hiked over, and there it was, a simple brown leather boot, laces tied, standing upright as if Terry just stepped out. No damage, no blood, just the boot. About an hour later, another team called from the eastern side, almost 2 miles away. I remember the cold, icy feeling in my guts when I heard what they'd discovered, the second boot. But this time, Terry was still inside. His foot was still there, severed just above the ankle. The torn skin, broken bone, a few flies circling that told us he hadn't died long ago. They snapped some photos, bagged the remains, and moved on. But from that moment on, the forest just felt heavier. We'd seen injuries before: falls, animal attacks, gunshot wounds, but this was different. Nothing like a bear attack, which usually leaves torn flesh, scattered bones and guts. No, this was something else. It felt deliberate. We widened our search grid, but we kept finding signs of blood everywhere. Tiny spatters on trees and rocks, smears that looked like someone flicked blood on the bark. One by one, we marked these with flags, trying to piece together what was happening. It was a mess, no pattern, just blood everywhere. Late afternoon, the fog rolled in thick, and we stuck close, moving slowly through the trees, marking blood spots as darkness fell. We set up a base camp near the ridge, planning to rest and search at first light. But I couldn't sleep. The forest was deadly silent, not an animal or breeze, just an oppressive hush, making every nerve on edge. At midnight, I heard a loud snapping branch, sharp as a gunshot, maybe 100 yards away. I sat up, flashlight on, sweeping the trees. Nothing moved. I stayed still, heart pounding, feeling like something unseen was watching us. Eventually, I managed a few hours of broken sleep. Morning came, and we resumed following the blood trail. It had been smeared on trees, dotted on branches, sometimes high enough I had to crane my neck to see it. I marked each spot on my map, heartbeat racing, the creeping sense that this wasn't just a search anymore. By noon, we reached the edge of the zone. We'd almost given up hope of finding Terry alive, anything left of him anyway. It was clear he was gone. The blood, the severed foot, the blood smattered all over the woods, that was all we'd find. We called off the search at the end of the third day. Terry's body was never recovered. They said it was an animal attack, makes sense for the torn pack and the severed foot, but I knew better. Nothing about it fit. No bear could tear through a pack and toss it 30 feet into a fragile tree, or spread blood that far, as if marking the forest with some sign. They filed the report, declared Terry dead, and left it at that. It was one of several failed missions in that decade. Most of us moved on, took desk jobs, or left the search and rescue life altogether. But I couldn't forget. The torn pack in the tree haunted me, and the severed foot ragged, torn from the ankle. That image stayed with me. All that blood, the snap of the branch, the feeling of being watched. No one else talked about it much afterward, but Paul, one of the team members, kept in touch. I remember asking him years later what he thought really happened. He just looked at me and said, "We didn't find him because he wasn't there to be found." And I knew exactly what he meant. I think Terry's spirit, or whatever, was out there, waiting, still lingering. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there, circling in the woods, watching new fools stumble across that place. I'll never forget how small I felt in that clearing, waiting for something I never saw. I don't know if it's dangerous or just there, but I do know it's not normal. Later, in the early 90s, I was working as a forestry surveyor in Yukon, Canada. We mapped the land, logged trees, marked terrain, noted the changes. But in the real woods, everything was different. Dense forests, jagged ridges, swampy lowlands that could swallow you whole. I had years of experience and learned to trust solitude. Then, in August 1993, I went deep into the interior, farther than I'd ever been, carrying a heavy pack, miles from the nearest road, totally alone and loving it. The start was normal. I woke at dawn, broke camp in the cool morning air, woods thick around me as I followed a drainage line. And then that's when things got weird. The trees ahead started to look strange, not leaning, not sick, but like they'd been pushed by an invisible force. I stopped, adjusted my pack, and squinted through the branches. Beyond the trees was a circle, an unnatural bald patch. As I stepped closer, the ground crunched beneath my boots. The entire area inside that circle was bleached bone white, as if drained of all color. No fire, no frost, just a ghostly, barren patch. The trees around looked like skeletons, bark peeling, thin and dry. I'd seen fire scars and beetle damage before, even fresh bear paw prints, but this was different. Drawn toward the center, despite the gut feeling telling me to stay back, I finally saw the crater, small, about 3 feet wide and 2 feet deep. Just a shallow bowl. I looked down, waiting for a sign of what made it, but there was nothing. No meteorite, no rocks, just empty earth. The air was eerily still, absolutely silent, and I felt a sudden cold crawl up my spine, like I was being watched by something very unkind. I shifted, trying to gather proof. Pulled out my old camera, trembling a little, and snapped pictures of the desolate trees, the white earth, and that shallow crater. Each shot seemed to make the hairs on my neck stand up. I knew I had to document it, show my boss, maybe the scientists. I hurriedly bagged my camera and started walking back out, eager to leave that place behind. But it was a long walk, about 6 or 7 hours, and I swear my mind was racing. The walk out felt like an eternity, the headache building behind my eyes, worsening with each step. When I reached the last ridge before the ranger station, I felt so awful I had to lean on a tree. That's when I threw up a rush of hot, sour liquid, and the realization hit me. Something was seriously wrong. I stumbled into the ranger station, pale, soaked in sweat, disoriented. Pete, the ranger, looked up from his log and froze at the sight of me, trembling, pale, maybe a little sick. Before I could even speak, he grabbed the radio and ordered a medical pickup. Everything after that was a blur. I blacked out, I think. When I came to, I was in a hospital, hooked up to IV fluids, feeling empty, hollowed out. White walls, beeping machines, an IV line in my arm. A nurse told me I was probably hit with some nasty virus, likely from an insect bite, and I'd be fine in a few days. But I kept staring at the impact site in my mind. It wasn't a bite. I told the doctor about the white spot in the woods, the crater, the empty hole. He listened, scribbled notes, then left. Said it could be worth checking into. I left the hospital a few days later, still shaky and exhausted, with a hefty bill. Back at headquarters, I handed in my camera. Harris, my boss, looked it over, then took it and asked me to recount everything I'd seen. When the tech developed the film, I was optimistic: images of the white trees, the impact zone, the blanched earth. But when he laid out the pictures, my heart sank. Every one of those shots of the impact site, the crater, the trees, was just static. White fuzz, no detail, not even of my earlier shots, just nothing. I clenched my fists on the table, staring at the blank images, and Harris pressed a hand on my shoulder, told me to take it easy. But I knew deep down, I knew they thought I was imagining it. The crazy fever, hallucinations, whatever. No proof, just my word. Over the following weeks, I kept the map I'd taken. Blood marks, little red X's still dotted all over it, stretching across the grid like some web. I didn't look at it often, but every time I did, I'd get a shiver. It all felt so wrong. Terry was gone, yes, but I felt like something was still out there, hiding in the woods, waiting. Sometimes I'd catch myself staring up at the sky on clear days, half expecting to see that same dark shadow, the one I'd photograph it if it was even real. I read everything I could, trying to piece it all together: UFOs, mysterious giant birds, secret experiments, but none fit quite right. Whatever we saw or didn't see, it seemed stranger than anything natural or known. It's like something that doesn't belong in this world. I've tried to move on, but that memory sticks: the white impact site, the blood, the silent woods. Most nights I remind myself it was all in my head, but sometimes, late at night, I still see that shadow lurking in my mind, waiting. I even went for a solo hike recently, hoping to reconnect with the woods, clear my head. Drove out to a trail I'd heard about in some remote woods. Just me, the hum of my engine, scenery blurring past. I parked, locked my car, started walking. Then foggy memories take over. The next thing I remember is pulling into my driveway with my hands on the wheel, the sun sinking, but everything in between erased, as if cut out. Like someone snipped part of a reel and stitched it back, leaving a gap in my memory. That night I sat on my couch, staring at the dark, trying to piece it together. I kept blinking, trying to recall what I'd seen or felt, but it was all gone: the trip, the woods, everything. Just blank. The next day I went to the doctor, showing him my boots, my clothes, proof I'd been out there. He poked, checked my reflexes, examined me. Said I seemed fine, no concussion, no illness. Come back immediately if it happens again, he warned. But even then, I had a bad feeling in my gut. That night I sat in my living room, staring at the TV, waiting for some sense to click. I thought maybe I just zoned out, like when you're driving and forget parts of the trip. But that wasn't it. Hours stolen, empty hours like they'd been taken from me. I got my laptop, looked up that trail, it's called Blackpine Loop, some forgotten old path. Browsed some hiking forums, hoping for info. All mostly pointless chatter, talk about deer or trail upkeep. But then, buried deep, I found a post from a guy who'd hiked that trail years before me. Said it felt wrong, like something was off. Trees looked strange, thin, twisted as if diseased. No mention of memory loss, but that description made me freeze. I shut my phone, didn't look at it again for days, trying to forget it. But these thoughts stayed, gnawing away. Weeks passed. I didn't tell anyone. What was I supposed to say? Hey, I went for a walk and forgot everything afterwards. They'd think I'd lost it or was crazy. Sometimes I catch myself staring into nothing, feeling like it's happening again. Borderline panic. But I tell myself, maybe I just imagined it. Maybe it was turbulence or some freak accident in the woods. I'd like to know the truth, believe me. But I think after all these years, I've come to accept that some things are better left alone. Still, I keep warning the new guys, stay away from strange things in the woods. They laugh, think I'm joking or just spinning stories. But I know better. The forest isn't just trees and dirt. Sometimes it hides things that make you sick, things that shouldn't be there. Now I'm an old man, almost 70, retired. Moved down south near White Horse. The nightmares have faded, but that memory, it still lingers. I keep those blurry photos tucked in an envelope in my desk drawer. Sometimes I pull them out, glance at those white smears and wonder. I've done some searching, trying to find explanations: radiation, chemical exposure, but nothing fits. No debris, no burn marks, no signs of radiation. The doctors would have found something if I'd been exposed. So I've come to believe there's probably a logical reason, even if I can't figure it out. And I guess it doesn't matter anymore if I saw that shadow again. I swear I'd turn and walk the other way. A few years ago, feeling restless, I decided to go for a solo hike, not something I do often, but I just needed to get out. I packed my gear and drove to a trail in some remote woods I'd never been to before. Quiet, peaceful, just me, the hum of the engine, the trees rushing past. I parked at a little gravel lot, locked up, and started walking. But somewhere along the way, everything gets fuzzy. My memory cuts out. I think I drove back home, hands on the wheel, sunset lingering, but the trip itself, nothing between. As if some part of it vanished, erased, like a chunk of film missing. That night, I sat on my couch, trying to piece it together, feeling uneasy. I looked at my boots, caked with mud and pine needles, proof I'd been out there. But I didn't remember stepping in the mud or around those trees. Did I hit my head? I went to the doctor, who checked me out, said I was fine, no signs of concussion, no injury. But I still had that nagging feeling. Something was wrong. That evening I stared at the TV. The same half-remembered sensation, like I was waiting for something to click, haunted me. I looked up that trail online. It's called Blackpine Loop, an old, seldom-used path. I read some trip reports, hoping for clues. Mostly, people talk about deer or overgrown paths. But then I found a post from a hiker who'd done it years before me. He said he felt strange the entire trip, like something in the woods was wrong. He described trees that looked sick, skinny, twisted, diseased. That overthought started to gnaw at me, and I shut my phone, trying to ignore it. Days turned into weeks, and I kept quiet, didn't tell anyone. What was I going to say? Hey, I went for a walk and forgot the last part. They'd think I'd gone mad. Sometimes I catch myself staring at emptiness, heart pounding, thinking it's happening again. But I tell myself I must be imagining it. Still, that creeping sense that somehow I was taken, that part of me is always there. Time kept passing. The nightmares faded, but I can't shake the feeling that something out there in the woods is waiting, watching. Maybe it's still out there, circling the woods, waiting for the next lost soul to wander in. I'll never forget how vulnerable I felt in that clearing, looking up at the sky, hoping, expecting something. But it never showed. If it's dangerous or just an anomaly, I don't know. I just know it's not normal, and I'd rather walk away if I see it again.